Big thanks to Paper Cat Games for providing the review code for the game. Hey guys, I'm not dead. I'm not, but if I was, if there was anyone I'd want to solve my murder case, because let's be real, it was probably a murder, then I would want the crew from Paper Perjury to solve the crime and bring the criminal involved to justice. If you know me, you know that I love me some Ace Attorney. I mean, I wouldn't have made a 4-hour video about it if that wasn't the case. And after playing through the entire series back in 2022, right away I was looking for more games to scratch that itch. There were a few games that I noticed and played through, and for the most part they were all very good. However, there was one game that I saw that really caught my eye. Paper Perjury. I can't exactly say how or why, it's just when I first saw that Steam page and took a look at the first teaser trailer, I knew I was in for something great. So I picked it up when the game released in December and played through it in about a week or two. And what did I think about it? Well, let's find out. Oh, also gonna keep this review mostly spoiler free, but as is with a game of this nature, there's certain things I'm gonna have to discuss that might be spoiler adjacent, so keep that in mind. Paper Perjury already sets itself apart from Ace Attorney and other Ace Attorney-like games, as instead of playing as an attorney, you're instead playing as Justina Smith, a police clerk who finds herself wrapped up in one of the biggest cases that Azure City has ever seen. You'll team up with a couple of detectives throughout the game as their assistant and solve a multitude of cases, all while bringing the criminal to justice. Apollo Justice. Like many Ace Attorney games, this game is split into 5 cases, with the first case acting as a tutorial case, and the 5th case acting as a finale case. However, in its own unique take on the formula, Paper Perjury is really just one big story beneath the surface, and having to go through 5 different, but connected cases in order to solve the underlying mystery. There are certain Ace Attorney games that attempt this, but I think that Paper Perjury executes upon that idea extremely well, more than any other Ace Attorney game has. The gameplay is divided into 2 sections. The meat of the game is the investigations. This is where you go around different locales involving the crime scene and gather evidence that might be helpful in finding the perpetrator. In addition, this is where you also gather statements from other witnesses. Using both statements and evidence, you then have to put the pieces together and poke holes in other statements by disputing any contradictions, which gives you even more evidence and context to further help the investigation. The other half of the game revolves around interrogation, where you take the offensive in the police department's interrogation room and question any and all suspects to further piece together what really happened and who's responsible. And this is where you nail down the perp of each case once and for all. If you've played an Ace Attorney game before, then it's extremely similar to something like that, although there are a few differences which I'll get into later. First and foremost, the biggest thing I gotta give praise to the game for are the characters. Right off the bat, I'm completely invested in Justina's story and her problems and dilemmas, whether that be anything related to the case or just a bit of additional flavor text. The team did an amazing job fleshing out nearly all the characters. They somehow make every single character extremely complex, even those that aren't on screen all that often. Even the perps, nearly all of them are sympathetic in one way or another, and it never feels forced, like I genuinely feel bad for almost all these guys. Both the leading detectives were able to have their own unique identities, and neither one of them overstayed their welcome. And I was genuinely shocked by how much I enjoyed the lawyer character. At first, I wasn't really feeling her. She kind of was just there because it's her family that's at the center of all the controversy. But as the game goes on, we see more and more tidbits into her life and how she connects to all these people, and I gotta say, it worked really well. She really clicked for me in case 4, where they do something really cool that I'm not gonna spoil, but it definitely cemented her as one of my favorite characters. Not only the characters themselves, but the connections between the characters too. Like, I don't know how, but they genuinely managed to make me care about how a lot of these characters end up in a very short amount of time. There's so many intertwining friendships and rivalries formed between nearly all the characters involved, and while not all of them get fully fleshed out, what we do see helps paint a really pretty picture. And that's not even to mention all the ships they set up. She's gay for her, he's gay for him, he's gay for her, everybody gay! Speaking of painting a pretty picture, I gotta say that this game looks gorgeous. They're somehow able to make these really detailed backgrounds that are filled to the brim with so many different pieces, all while adhering to the pixelated art style. Seriously, it looks like a LucasArts point-and-click game at times. The colors are great too. As you can probably tell, I'm a big fan of the color purple. and this game is just bursting with it, as well as a lot of other colors with a cool tone. The characters seem to take after the Ace Attorney GBA sprites, except obviously these ones are more detailed. Admittedly, at first, I wasn't really huge on the design of a lot of these characters. They were a little too clean and perfect for my taste, you know? Some of the characters seem a bit more over-designed than others, and that's where this problem is really noticeable. I also really was not a fan of the blush they were giving to nearly all the characters. I thought it looked really weird and extremely off, and it kinda clashed with the style, if I'm gonna be honest. But that's more of a personal issue, I guess. I did eventually get used to the characters and grew to appreciate all the little design quirks they had. Even if some of them needed a bit more time in the oven, maybe, probably. The soundtrack is also pretty solid too. Does a good job of taking the cues of the Ace Attorney games while also finding its own identity. Nothing I'd listen to on its own, but seeing as each musical piece elevates the scenes within the game, I mean, I can't really ask for much more, now can I? The game's not perfect, however, I do have a few gripes. They also try to do this Ace Attorney thing of giving everyone punny names that associate with their character traits. Sometimes this works really well, like with our titular character Justina Smith, or Ernest Hunt, the detective who spends the latter half of the game in the background trying to hunt down an answer to a big question that's revealed later on in the game. Some of them, however, are not as great. This woman's name is Sue P. Earle. Get it? It's supposed to sound like superior, since she's Justina's boss. I mean, at that point, why not go with something like Sue P. Rear? Okay, saying that out loud, I get why they did not go with that. Another problem I have is with the gameplay mechanics as a whole. Now, to be clear, for the most part, it's extremely solid. The gameplay loop of investigating and questioning people is very fun, so I have to give kudos to the team for that. However, there's kind of a big problem with the core function of the game. See, you can't lose. For some reason I genuinely don't understand, in Paper Perjury, there is no penalty system for wrongly interrogating someone. You can present evidence on whatever statement you want, and you don't get so much as a slap on the wrist for presenting the wrong evidence at the wrong time. You could just present everything on every statement until you get it right. Then what's the point of any of this? If this was just for the investigation portion, I mean, I still wouldn't like it, but I could at least understand why they did it. But this translates over to the interrogation gameplay as well, arguably the most crucial part of all the cases. They even go on record sometimes to point out how important these are. Yet you could probably think otherwise given how you can just do whatever you want during these sections and have nothing happen. To add on to this, in Ace Attorney, at some points during testimony, you have to press the witness to give you more information. The pressing doesn't always work, and in some rare instances it actually hurts you. But many times it gives you more necessary context in regards to further testimony that helps you piece things together. Paper Perjury has something similar to this, in the form of questioning people's statements. Here's the thing though, and I could be wrong since I technically didn't do this all the time, so feel free to call me out on this in the comments. You never have to question anybody. Ever. Seriously, you get no additional context or statements from them when you do question them, and more often than not, it's just flavor text, which I don't necessarily hate, but like, why even have this as a mechanic in the first place if you never need to use it at all? Honestly though, all these issues and complaints so far are personal, and none truly detract from the greatness of this game, at least not all that much. I can't really say that about my main issue with the game. That being the UI and text boxes. I know that sounds like I'm nitpicking at this point, but in a visual novel series specifically, these are crucial. For clarity's sake, I played the entire game on my Steam Deck, as I don't have a way to play on PC at this point, so some of these problems might not apply at all for some of you. So all of your necessary information is stored in your folder, which is split up into 3 sections. The profiles page is harmless, it just has all the characters in the case and who they are and any important context about them. I really have nothing to say about this page. The summary page is split into 4 sections. Detective's brief, which gives you an overview of the case as a whole, which is fine. Investigation log, which gives a play-by-play of all the events that happened in that case up until that point, all from the perspective of Justina, which again is also fine, but doesn't really add anything to the overall game. Leads, which is a checklist of what needs to be done and what's already been done, which is actually pretty helpful. And statements, which is a collection of all the character statements that you've collected over the case, which is completely unnecessary since they're also in the evidence window. And speaking of the evidence window, this is easily my least favorite of the three, which is great because you obviously go into it the most. Yay! I'm already not the biggest fan of the verticality of it compared to the horizontal nature of Ace Attorney, but there's an added bonus to this as well. Again, not sure if this is any different on a PC, but on Steam Deck, if you need to get something on the bottom of the list, for example, you can't just use the D-pad to scroll to the bottom. No. That only scrolls to the last piece of evidence that's currently on screen. You need to actually use the right joystick to move the evidence page down, and then use the D-pad to select the piece of evidence once it's visible. I completely understand how this sounds like I'm grasping at straws, but trust me when I say this got extremely annoying really quickly. Like, I'm talking like first case quickly. That's how bad it was. And don't quote me on this, but the way the evidence works might be a bit bugged as well. I have to scroll through all my footage to confirm, but basically, once you present a wrong piece of evidence on a certain piece of statement, that piece of evidence becomes crossed out. That's nothing more than a visual indicator. You can present it again. However, for whatever reason, it will remain crossed out on other pieces of the statement as well, which wouldn't be an issue if that didn't mean that it crossed out a correct piece of evidence for using it on the wrong piece of statement, on the correct piece of statement. So if I present a phone, for example, on a piece of the statement that's incorrect, it would remain crossed out for the entirety of the statement, even if the phone was correct on another piece of the statement. No joke, I was stuck on one part for like 30 minutes because of this. I was so confused on what was going on. And as for the text boxes, well, there's nothing inherently wrong with the boxes themselves. They actually are pretty visually pleasing. It's the mechanics surrounding the text boxes that are just so irritating. For starters, like with later Ace Attorney games, Paper Perjury has a record of everything that's said that's easily accessible in case you need to go back and look at something you might have accidentally skipped over. That's a really great feature, and I'm glad that they incorporated it here. My main issue is that it's not really fully incorporated, or at least not to the level that I hope. See, it works 90% of the time, but for whatever reason, during interrogations, it just doesn't record what the person is saying. You have to actually loop and replay the interrogation in order to read everything again, and it just seems like a complete oversight. My least favorite thing about the text boxes, however, is how they implemented the back button. See, in Ace Attorney, when you select to talk to someone, but want to go back to see what other options there are, you'd simply just press like the B button or something, and that would take you back to the top menu. In this game though, the back button works more so as a reverse button, where instead of taking you back to the top menu, it actually plays the previous text box. But it's so cumbersome to have to go back to the top menu through a text box option. What's even weirder is that if you got a piece of evidence, or update the evidence you had on hand, it would play that little notification again if you reverse the text box, which makes me wonder how the game was internally programmed. All that said though, I really don't want it to seem like I had a bad time with this game. Far from it, I actually really enjoyed it. That UI and text box stuff was a really big issue for me, but it's also ones that I know are pretty simple and easy to fix and patch, at least in the grand scheme of things. So if anyone from Paper Cat Games is watching this, I hope they do take note of this. But again, the fact that my main issue is something that can and probably will be easily fixed with a future update is not entirely a bad thing. Everything else I wasn't a fan of in this game was way more subjective. I can't even really hate on the no penalty thing all that much, since the game really is such a vibe throughout. I also gotta give props to this team for not only nailing the feel of an Ace Attorney game, but also branching out and finding its own unique voice and style, which to be fair doesn't always work for me, but most of it's still pretty great. Definitely recommend this game if you're an Ace Attorney fan, and even if you're not but still into visual novels with a unique style and some extremely well written characters, like I cannot stress how much I love these characters, then this game is for you. Can't wait to see what Paper Cat Games has in store for the future, because I'll definitely be keeping an eye out. Soupy Rear.
All right, everyone out. I got a soupy keister.